At one point in your life, you had gills. Does that make you part fish? Well, in a word, yes. My name is Mike Rainey, and this is Not So Random Facts. Now, we're all familiar with random facts, of course. For instance, over 80% of koalas have chlamydia. Interesting. It might make you smirk or feel bad for koalas, but beyond that, it does little to inform your day. It may well leave you wondering how that many koalas got an STD in the first place, or what we should do about it. But it's probably not going to come up too much in your day-to-day activities. Now, while we won't be speaking on that today, we will explore another random fact, this one a little closer to home. I believe that these facts are only random because we don't understand the context behind them. After all, a fact without context ultimately doesn't have much meaning in your life. And so this podcast is an exploration of all the interesting little quirks in our universe, in order to give them context, to explain the why behind the fact. My hope is that by gaining a greater understanding of how life, the universe, and everything works, we'll have a better appreciation for it. We'll have better insight into why people do what they do, or why the physical world reacts in a certain way. Or at the very least, I hope to entertain you a little, while encouraging you to be scientific in your own lives. I don't expect you to open a lab or anything, but viewing the world more analytically can give you insight into all manner of subjects, anything you might be interested in. So let's start today with something we've all experienced, hiccups. But before we talk about hiccups, we need to talk about the entirety of human evolution. It should only take a few minutes. The human body is without a doubt a marvel of biological design. The heart pumps over 2,000 gallons of blood every day. The thigh bone is stronger than steel, and the brain has 86 billion nerve cells, joined by 100 trillion connections, which gives the brain its amazing processing power. I could go on and on about the wonders of the human body, and I'm sure I will in a future episode. But it isn't without its flaws and quirks, and anyone who has had to have their wisdom teeth or appendix removed may well question that design. The human body, as we know it today, is a result of billions of years of evolution and natural selection. That word, selection, carries a connotation of intention, that there is a specific way we are meant to evolve, or a species is meant to develop. But natural selection is much more of a guess-and-check method. It's the universe throwing DNA at the wall and seeing what sticks. Every offspring of every species experiences genetic mutations. It happens during meiosis, the cell division that results in the sperm and ova cells. Usually, these mutations are small, easily corrected, or within the norms of the species. In fact, you may be a mutant and not even realize it. Do you have blue eyes or red hair? Or the ability to drink milk as an adult? That's right. Not being lactose intolerant is a mutation. Those are all mutations that have stuck around and quote-unquote infected the human genome. But as they have little overall effect on your life, they don't play into natural selection. A fact that will come up again in this discussion. Now, every once in a while, a mutation makes for a more dramatic change. This might be a misread DNA sequence, a mismatch when the parents' chromosomes are combined, or even a virus that permanently changes your genetics, which can and does happen. In fact, some research suggests that as much as 8% of the human genome was inserted by viruses. These mutations will then affect that individual's chances of survival within their environment. If it is a positive effect, and that individual survives to adulthood, then they may pass on that mutation to their offspring. If the mutated genes stick around for enough generations, then the beneficial trait soon spreads through the population. And with enough generations and enough mutations, that population might evolve into a new species. This usually takes thousands, if not millions, of years. And again, this isn't planned out in any way. Many of these mutations have negative effects, and in many instances, those individuals die off. If they die before passing their unique genetic code to the next generation, that mutation cancels itself out, and the beneficial traits are kept around, which is what we mean by naturally selected. But even beneficial genes are situationally dependent. There's a famous case of natural selection happening in real time from the 19th century. In England, there lived a particular insect called a peppered moth. It's mostly white with dark spots, as if pepper had been poured on the insect, hence the name. This particular species of moth had developed a very effective camouflage, as the white speckled pattern let the moth blend in perfectly with the bark of the trees in the area. However, as the Industrial Revolution ramped up in the early 19th century, coal was burned on a massive scale, filling the air with black clouds and ash, and soon the landscape was blanketed in soot. This soot covered the trees in a dark layer, and suddenly the white-peppered moth stood out easily against the background. These easily spotted moths were consumed, and their population was decimated. Nevertheless, a genetic mutation saved the species. Occasionally, a moth would hatch that was completely black. Ordinarily, this would put the moth at a great disadvantage, but in this new darkened environment, it suddenly had camouflage when no other moths did. The darkened moths passed on their genes, and soon all peppered moths were black in color. They suddenly had camouflage when no other moths did, and they survived. Fast forward several decades, and England furthers its revolution, creating industry that was much cleaner. As the air was no longer filled with the toxic residue of burnt coal, the forests were gradually cleared of ash and soot until the original bark was once again visible. And once again, the predators of the peppered moths had a field day as they ate what were now highly visible black moths. And just as before, a small population that now had the camouflage advantage began to increase in population until the peppered moths returned to their original colors and their original balance within the ecosystem. While this is but a simple example, it does indicate how natural selection can craft an animal, and in a relatively short period of time. And it also indicates that the potential for these variations are hidden away in your genetic code, just waiting to be expressed at the right opportunity. An opportunity that may come from the outside world. So what does all this have to do with humans and fish? It's the reason all of you are listening. Are humans part fish? I said yes, but that is an oversimplification. The truth is that you, like every other species on Earth, are the result of millions of generations and countless genetic mutations. While beneficial mutations led to success in life and potentially new species, and bad mutations often lead to death, many mutations stick around because they don't have much of an effect at all. Remember when we mentioned blue eyes and red hair? Well, do people with blue eyes have better immune systems? Are they stronger, smarter, more fertile? No, they just happen to have blue eyes. These mutations stick around because there's nothing getting rid of them. No detriment that makes them work against natural selection. But even in the case of beneficial changes, the previous versions of each trait are still locked away in the DNA sequence. And one simple change can mean the difference between life and death. In a study of African populations, researchers found a mutation in the hemoglobin of red blood cells called HBS that creates a curved, sickle-like shape to the cells. And those people are 30% less likely to contract malaria, one of the deadliest diseases in the region. But a second copy, while increasing resistance to malaria, also results in sickle cell anemia, a debilitating disease. This is another example of situationally dependent evolution. The mutation only really matters in a beneficial way because of the harmful virus in the environment, but the overall benefit can go either way. One way or another, we're all mutants. Our genes express in thousands of different ways, which creates something called our phenotype, or the observational expression of our genetic code. Look, to put it simply, it's what we look like, but it doesn't necessarily reflect our genotype. That's the actual differences in our genetic code. Environmental stimuli, such as the amount of sunlight you're exposed to, can change your phenotype. It's an observational change, but it doesn't mean that much on a genetic level. Society has chosen to categorize people based on the phenotype of skin color, but if you ask most geneticists, there isn't a genetic basis for race. All people are just people. We all have pigment in our skin, the expression of which is based on how much sun was present in our environment. It's human nature for us to see something that looks different and assume that it is different, but it's actually a logical fallacy. On the genetic level, these changes are so minute that in the grand scheme of things, they make almost no difference at all. All humans have the same base pairs making up their genetic code, but turning that DNA into a fully formed individual is a multi-stage process. DNA has 2.9 billion base pairs, or about 270 megabytes of data, but not all of it is used when making you. The DNA sequence must be interpreted by your RNA to create the proteins and amino acids that create you, but not all of your chromosomes are used. In fact, entire sections are often ignored. Recently, scientists have put more and more research into epigenetics, or the study of inherited changes to the functioning of genes without any actual change to the DNA. It's an effort to explain why some portions of your DNA are expressed while others are ignored, and they're amazed to find that hundreds of things in the environment can change this expression. Lack of sleep, your diet, your exercise, stress, external stimuli, and toxins in the environment can all change what portion of your chromosomes are actually activated and become a part of your body. And these interpretations of the DNA can be passed on to the next generation. You aren't just passing down the book of information that is your DNA. You're also telling your offspring how to read that book and what parts you should skip over. You may see examples of this in your own family. Some traits will skip a generation or seemingly pop up at random. If you're the only one in your family with a particular trait, it may well indicate that trait was locked away in the genetic code of your parents or ancestors until it was read by the RNA in you. For scientists, this gives us a wide variety of tools for interpreting species. We can view an entire history of a species that would otherwise be invisible. This has given us tremendous insight into the development of the natural world and helped us determine how humans became humans. Using genetics and the fossil record, we can trace the evolution of species from the earliest single-celled organisms to the complex creatures we see around us today. We know that life started in moisture-rich environments like the ocean, and it is there that multicellular life first took shape. We know that all vertebrates have a common ancestor, that the spinal cord was an extraordinary advantage that led fish to a successful existence and opportunities to expand beyond other sea life. We can trace the progression from fish to amphibian to reptile, the step-by-step genetic changes that led a small, furry creature to change and develop into an upright primate. And it explains one of the interesting quirks of human development, the fact that as a fetus, humans have gills. When the sperm and egg cell combine chromosomes, they immediately start dividing and differentiating into what will eventually become all the different organs of the human body. The beginnings of the spinal cord develop in the first few weeks, with a bulge at one end that will eventually become the human brain. After 3 to 4 weeks, the lungs develop, and another small bulge that will become the heart starts to beat. Arm buds and a tail are visible, the tail being another example of our evolutionary past still locked away somewhere in our DNA. And we have what in other vertebrates would be the beginnings of gill-like structures on our neck. But as the fetus develops, the structures on the head and neck move dramatically. Your eyes start off on the side of your head before moving to the front, and those gill-like structures shift up and separate, eventually forming the jaw, upper palate, and nostrils. And all the tissues and muscles must align at just the right moment to create a seamless connection. If the timing is off by as little as an hour, this can result in a cleft lip or palate, a condition that affects 1 in 700 babies born around the world. There are other interesting features that we as embryos share with fish. But as the fetus begins to develop, it becomes more and more recognizably human. The arm and leg buds grow hands and feet, the tail disappears, and the complex sensory organs develop into the modern human face. The only evidence of the fishy origin is the philtrum. It's that little ridge between your upper lip and your nose. That's where the gill structures fuse together. But there is one more holdover from your ocean-dwelling ancestors that you carry all the way into adulthood. Hiccups. Hiccups are actually a holdover from the amphibian transformation that led to all land-dwelling vertebrates, and they are mostly harmless. The record for longest bout of hiccups belongs to Charles Osborne, who hiccuped for 68 years straight from 1922 to 1990. Clearly, it has no major detriment to your life, though it can certainly be annoying. But why do humans do it? The hiccup is a spasm of the diaphragm, followed by a gulp in the throat. Breathing is actually a pretty complicated process, where the throat muscles must work in unison with the diaphragm to give lungs the proper amount of air. And if anything goes wrong in that process, it can create the spasm that leads to hiccups. Now, this can be extraordinarily useful for tadpoles. They have the unique situation of having both lungs and gills, and being able to draw oxygen from more than one environment. But switching from one to the other can be tricky to learn. So as tadpole lungs are developing, they still need to draw in oxygen from the gills. And they do this by closing off the lungs while simultaneously gulping in water that run over those gills and give them oxygen. Their hiccups kept them alive while they were still learning to breathe air. And since we share the same origin for our nervous system, the same series of nerves lead to our lungs that lead to theirs, we occasionally have the same reaction, even though we don't have gills. There's a number of things that can set off hiccups, such as an imbalance of air in the lungs. And in that moment, a locked-away portion of our amphibian DNA does what it thinks it's supposed to do to ensure you have oxygen moving through your body. It hiccups. Your body being completely unaware that the gills that make hiccups actually useful were lost millions of years ago. So the next time you get the hiccups, while you're drinking water or scaring yourself in an attempt to get rid of this annoying peculiarity, take a moment to reflect back on the wonder of evolution that led to humans being human. Billions of years of trial and error on a global scale have made more changes to life than we could possibly count, and have led to the unique and special design that makes us, us. We're pretty amazing. We're a true marvel of genetic engineering developed in a planet-wide laboratory that created millions of other equally amazing life forms. Surely we can forgive evolution for letting a quirk or two slip through the cracks in that case. That's it for this episode. I hope you learned something and that you look at hiccups and tadpoles in a slightly new light. At least you have something to blame next time you get the hiccups, and scaring yourself doesn't work. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe for more. Give me a rating wherever you download your podcasts, share this with your friends, and of course, let me know what else you'd like to hear about. You can follow me on Twitter at RainyMichaelV. The V stands for Velocity, we'll go with this week. Send me suggestions for future episodes using the hashtag #NotSoRandom, and I will do my best to explain, debunk, or just have fun with all the random facts you hear of and have always wondered about. I'll be releasing an episode of this podcast every other Tuesday, so tweet at me whenever you can. Thank you again for listening. I'm Michael Rainey, and I'll catch you next time.